Blog Talk Radio.
Everybody, welcome to Morris Talk Live 100. I'm your host, Tarhaka, and tonight, mental cognitive dissonance of those who believe they are black people. The mental health of these people. We'll be dealing with the following questions. What is the solution to the mental health crisis among our people? How bad is the problem? Has America driven people insane on this land? What did a loss of identity have to do with it? What about black people's priority arrangements? What to do next, and what does the future look like? Okay, we're going to get down to that tonight, and based on what I'm dealing with here, it looks like I'm going to have to do a part 2 on this because there's too much information to be covered here. Now I want to start off coming to you from a book written by a sister by the name of Shahrazad Ali in her book, The Black Woman's Guide to Understanding the Black Man, and I'm coming to you from chapter 1, page 18, starting in the second paragraph. It states the following, and this is for sisters who have young sons, and if you're a single parent, if you have young sons and young daughters and stuff, I want you to really think about what was written here in this chapter in regards to the molding and shaping of your child until they become into adulthood. Now, I didn't get any of this like a lot of us didn't out there. I know that. But we're going to put it out for those who have the young children who need to know what to do, and even if you have children that's grown up and stuff, what to do. So this is why I'm bringing this to you. We got a new holiday coming up here. I think it's Labor Day, Memorial Day or something. I don't know. I don't deal with none of that. But nevertheless, it states the following in the second paragraph of chapter 1. Interestingly, all of the holidays the black boy was taught about contain various aspects of fear and the supernatural. They also instilled certain ideals and imprinted Western values in his head, all rooted in expressing gratitude, honor, and respect for the white males. Additionally, to the festive holidays during his first few years of school, he learned about Abraham Lincoln, a former American president who freed the slaves. His little brain was too undeveloped along with his short attention span to give him any long drawn-out political explanation about old age and his real position on slavery. No one told him that Mr. Lincoln made a strictly political decision that public relations wise awarded him the misleading credit of freeing the slaves. This was the first major mention of slavery he ever heard of. He was programmed with the impression that Negroes was happy slaves, needed the master to take care of them. He was told stories about how the slaves sang while they worked and danced all night. Nothing was mentioned to him about how Negroes became slaves or where they originally came from. He was just taught to be grateful old Abe was setting the slaves free. Lincoln's a tall white man, but nice as Johnny Appleseed. Christopher Columbus was always highlighted for his masterful discovery of America, which he accomplished in 1492 by sailing across the ocean from England in 3 ships supplied by his queen. It was quite easy to teach the black boy about boats floating on water with a great captain at the helm. Teaching black boys to be grateful to Columbus is one of the worst travesties of misrepresentation ever inflicted on him. Telling him to respect and honor Christopher Columbus Day is like teaching a Jewish child to celebrate Adolf Hitler's Day. It is that far from the truth. The falsified, historical, incorrect information is still taught to the black boy today, despite serious scholars announcing that Columbus introduced Western colonization, capitalism, and slavery on the North American continent and the Americas. Furthermore, studies show that he was already entertaining a few pre-Nazi theories on the natural supremacy of the white race. Proceeded to inflict genocidal practices on the native Indians who were already set up and functioning in their own civilization with Columbus first adopted. Old Chris was eventually debunked and jailed for unscrupulous politics. Every notable or famous individual that the black boy was introduced to, be he real or imagined, was in the personhood of the white male. Thus, he completed nearly 13 years of public school education, acknowledging that every commendable action or intellectual victory was attributed to the white man. Nobody ever taught him during his formative years of the black man's place in history or his record of achievement. He had no knowledge of his own people or their contributions to math, science, medicine, or art. His own parents rarely mentioned black history to him. His church did not place blacks in any biblical context, and it was subtly suggested to him that being colored, a Negro, or black was something bad and undesirable. And if somebody insulted him by calling him black, he was always ready to fight about it. He wasn't black, and he didn't want anybody trying to say he was. Black was a bad word only used in anger and hatred against another Negro. The system of loading the black boy's brain with foreign data put into motion an adult black male who left his home to confront the world and his destiny with absolutely no knowledge about his past, with a white man's name, an Anglo-Saxon religion, and a memory dedicated to Western values that would plague him for generations to come. This intentional cover-up laid the foundation for the confusion and displacement that would eventually lead to his present endangered classification. The ultra-critical years between 1940 and 1990 produced the current perilous legacy of the black man, his sons and his grandsons. This book is about the damaging effect of the brainwashing that the black man was subjected to during that 50-year period. And it represents the first contemporary debriefing session he has ever had since slavery. Okay? This is critical to me, and personally speaking, I want to ask you all right now today, because this is my personal belief, and actually this is what we are actually doing. I personally believe that when your son becomes 9 years old, he should know how to fire a high-powered rifle. He should know how to use handguns, not only to actually fire them and actually hit the target, but how to break them apart, clean them, put them back together, and actually how to make the necessary ammunition by 9 years old, and the daughters too. Then he should be taught how to use a knife from a distance, how to throw it and make it stick, how to get up close and personal and go to work with it. And the reason being is because you never know when he's going to need these skills in order to kill an animal or something to provide food for his family. And I think they should be taught at an early age. And then after he gets these skills, while he's getting these skills, he should be taught about who it was exactly that murdered his people, lynched his people, and enslaved his people. All of these should be coming into the nutshell, and this is what we should be doing. Now, let's get on down in here, and let's check out some of this other stuff in here. But what I'm going to do before I go any further, I'm going to my first commercial break, and y'all hold on for a minute, and we'll be right back.
Let me make sure I got this right. You have a mortgage. You were told the bank would give you a loan for your home. But when you got to the bank, they didn't give you anything or sign anything. But presto changeo, you have a new mortgage. Then you find out your mortgage has been sold to another company you don't know and don't have any contract with. It seems to me something is wrong. When you walked out the bank, you had some papers in your hand, but no check. Let's get to the bottom, down to the bottom of this kind of stuff. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Let's bring the fraud to a close. How about that? This kind of stuff is going on all over the United States, but most people don't even understand what to do about it. TarhakaDebtElimination.org.
Okay, we're back. Keep in mind the chat room is open, and y'all be courteous up in there, and I'll try to get over there as quickly as I can. I want to set the stage for this nationally, and let you know that something has an alternative that we need to pay attention to. And after you hear this, I want to let you know to don't hesitate to contact me so I can supply you with the necessary information and documentation and leadership to go over where you're supposed to go and to participate in what we have to do in this country today. Okay, this is a major thing here. Okay, now y'all pay very close attention to what this gentleman has to say.
Well, I'll tell you, the American people really need to stop thinking of themselves as Americans. Honestly, this is a mental trap. It's a trick, actually, to make you feel invested in a system that does not invest in you. If you're a part of a so-called minority community especially, then you only think of yourselves that way because you're an American, or you think of yourself as an American, so you're a minority in American society. But it's a lie if you look at the bigger picture. Obviously, you're not minorities. You're members of the global majority who happen to live in the United States. You're a diaspora community from the global majority. The majority in that country is a global minority. But as long as you think of yourselves as American, well, you will think of yourselves as a minority. Because you've believed in this society, in this system. You have invested in it, and you believe yourself to be a part of the very society that tells you you don't belong in that society. You see? It would be like inmates in a prison thinking that they're actually part of the staff of the prison administration. Like you aren't incarcerated and abused in that jail, you just work there. Except that the other people who call themselves prison staff get to go home after their shifts, while you just get to stay there. You have to stay there in your cell. But you pretend, you imagine, that there's some equality between you and the prison guard, between you and the prison staff. That's what it's like if you're a so-called minority in America. You're a prisoner who thinks that he's a guard. But the guards will never hesitate to remind you which one of you has the baton, which one of you has the club, which one of you has the rights, and which one of you has freedom. But even then, you seem to think that the prison works just like seniority at a company or something, as if as a prisoner, the longer you serve, eventually you'll get to be the warden. That's how delusional you are. It doesn't work like that. No, you're not an American, and you're not a minority. You're a member of the global majority who just happens to be in the United States. And I'm telling you, this applies whether your so-called minority status is based on race or color or ethnicity or if it's based on religion, or even if it's based on your economic status, because most of the people on earth are not white, they're not Christian, and they're not rich. So you need to think of yourselves as part of the rest of the people in the world who look like you, who believe like you, and who struggle financially like you. Those are your compatriots, your comrades, your brothers and sisters. That's your nation. If you think of yourselves in any other kind of way, then this is just a tactic for reducing you and cutting you off from the power that comes from numbers. You know how foolish it sounds to anyone else, anyone who looks at the totality of the world, when you say something like Asian minorities, black and brown minorities, right? It's absurd. Over 85% of the population on the planet is either Asian or African or Latin American. You think that you're a blade of grass in the desert, but the desert is just a little tiny sandbox in the middle of a field of grass. So don't think of yourselves as minorities in America. Think of yourselves as representing the global majority that encircles that country. So if you can readjust your thinking along these lines, then you might also better understand that as a part of the international majority, you're supposed to redress your grievances to international bodies for justice. And you look at the crimes and the violations that are committed against you in that country as breaches of international law, which they are. The same way that they're crimes and violations of international law when that country does the same things overseas, when America does things overseas, because your rights are profoundly violated in that country. And the worst part about it is that the indoctrination system has normalized it for you and has made you think that your only recourse when your rights are violated is to go to the ones who are committing the violations. You know, they cut you off from the international community, from the global majority, and made you think that when, for example, when the police murder innocent members of your community, you're supposed to turn to the police for justice. You're supposed to go to the very security forces that are targeting your community for extrajudicial killings and ask them for justice. No. You're supposed to go to the United Nations. You're supposed to go to the International Criminal Court, to the International Court of Justice. I mean, tell me, why the so-called police officers and the chiefs of police and the police commissioners and so on, all of those police officials who are involved in any extrajudicial killing in the United States, why were they put on trial in Minnesota, in Pennsylvania, Missouri, Texas, or Kansas, or what have you? Why not at The Hague? I mean, you say it's systemic, don't you? You know it's systemic targeting of so-called minority communities. You can't look at the mass incarceration numbers and not know that this is systemic targeting, mass incarceration of members of the global majority in the United States, who are then forced to work as slave labor for private enterprise in prison, often for the rest of their lives. This is systemic population reduction of so-called minority communities through extrajudicial killing and detention. Well, that's nothing but a form of ethnic cleansing. But again, they make you think it's normal. It's not normal. It's criminal. And it's a crime against humanity. It's a violation of international law. And you are members of the international community, whether you realize it or not. Your government, your system, has got you believing that international law doesn't apply to you. Well, why do you suppose they made you think that? Because they don't want you to know that their treatment of you is not normal, that it's not civilized, and that it's not legal. They have you thinking that you have the most rights of any people on earth, the most freedom of any people on earth, and so on. And that's precisely because you don't. You're like an abused spouse who's been browbeat into thinking that you're married to the most wonderful person on earth. Meanwhile, that same person treats you like a monster, treats everyone else like a monster, and is viewed by everyone else as a monster. The mass incarceration, prison industrial complex, ethnic cleansing system is a violation of the International Labor Organization's Convention number 29, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And of course, it's a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is nothing short of modern-day slavery. And it's a shame that you don't even know that there are laws higher than the laws of your city, your state, and your federal government that exist to protect you. The same goes for every manifestation of racism, of white supremacy, and every form of discrimination in your country. These are all violations of international law, and you should have redress to that. You know, they just made homelessness illegal in America. Can you imagine that? It's illegal to be homeless, but not illegal to make you homeless. Criminalizing being poor when you are made poor by a criminal system. You're not allowed to not have enough money to pay for your own survival, but they're allowed to make your survival too expensive to pay for. And if you have any blots on your credit record, Why, it may as well be a criminal record. You can't rent, you can't get a job, you can't secure housing, you can't get a car, anything. And they talk about China's social credit system. Well, you invented it. They've got your social security number around your neck like an iron collar. Everybody in that country has debt collectors chasing after them like bloodhounds after an escaped convict. Well, you know, there's something called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and that's supposed to protect you. But they don't want anyone to know about it. They want you to think that your only recourse is to go to the government for help, when it's that same government that puts you in debt, keeps you in debt, and is itself in debt. The same government that is bought and paid for by the very predatory, parasitic companies that make life too expensive in America, that make it impossible to get an education without drowning in debt for the rest of your life. The same government and the same courts that have taken all the rights and protections away from you and given them to corporations and given them to the super rich. They don't want you to even know about your rights under international law. This is the dual purpose of American exceptionalism. They don't respect international law. They think that they're above the law, and they want you to have that same attitude. But the difference is that you're suffering because of it, because they don't respect international law when it comes to their own people. You think that they defy the law everywhere else but adhere to it at home? No. They're criminals outside and they're criminals inside. And the thing that enables them to be that way is their domination of the United Nations. You have as much at stake as the rest of the world does when it comes to the invocation of Article 6. The only difference between you and America's victims all around the world is that at least they know that they're victims. You think you're privileged. If we can get the U.S. expelled from the UN for their persistent violations of the principles of the UN Charter, I'm telling you, you can't even fathom how different this world could be, how different your own lives can be. The Article 6 campaign is fighting for a day when the United States will be held accountable for its crimes against humanity, both abroad and at home. This measure would be the most decisive blow imaginable to the American tyranny that you and I have been living under and suffering under for our whole lives, and what the whole world has been enduring for as long as anyone can remember. We can foresee a future with the Article 6 campaign in which the United Nations is, once it's liberated from U.S. domination and control, it could actually impose accountability on the United States, something that is practically and procedurally impossible right now, as long as America reigns on the Security Council. We can envision a future where the world unites to impose economic sanctions on America, to cut the empire off at the knees and force it to reckon with the blood they have on their hands. But this struggle isn't only about liberating the oppressed people of the world. No, like I said, it's also about liberating the American people themselves from the chains of corporate tyranny and state oppression. Because the United States is not just a global oppressor, it's an oppressor of its own people. The American people have been deceived. They've been manipulated, and they've been dominated by the private sector, by the corporations that control their government, control their economy, and control their everyday lives. These corporations, these faceless entities of greed, have built their empire on the suffering of the working class, the exploitation of the poor, and on the backs of all of those poor people who believed in the so-called American dream. But it turns out that it wasn't a dream at all. It's a drunken stupor. You're drunk from propaganda and indoctrination, and on top of that, you're punch drunk from enduring the relentless beating that that system has been giving you your whole life. And it's time to sober up. Don't you know that if the UN is allowed to do its job, America can be punished for its actions? America can be sanctioned. And what better punishment could there possibly be for a system that prioritizes profit over everything else? Why, America can't cope if they were sanctioned by major trading partners and by 190 nations on Earth. You operate on a trade deficit every year, about $1 trillion worth. That means that you import $1 trillion worth of goods more than you export. And you're importing things that you can't produce yourselves. Yeah, I know it sounds like this is going to make your life harder, but this is a process of struggle and sacrifice that you're going to have to go through to wrestle your way out of corporate domination. With the Article 6 campaign, we can envision a world where the power of these corporations is shattered. When the sanctions come, when American businesses lose their grip on global markets, the stranglehold that corporations have on the American people will weaken. Without the profits that fuel their domination, these corporations will lose their influence over the government, over the economy, over every aspect of American life. Look, the American economy, the military-industrial complex, has long been propped up by the exploitation of the world and the manufacture of conflicts across the globe by means of using the United Nations. Well, wait until that system contracts. The collapse of the old system will make way for something new, something better, something moral, inshallah. We're working towards a future where Wall Street, that temple of greed and corruption, is brought to its knees. When the sanctions hit, the stock market will tremble and the dollar will weaken. But it's not something to fear. This is something to welcome. When the financial markets are in turmoil, the power of the corporate elite will be shaken. The American people will have the chance to demand a new economic model that serves the many and not just the few. We're pushing for a future where these multinational behemoths, which have robbed people of their livelihoods and of their dignity, get dismantled. We're striving for a world where the U.S. no longer has the power to intimidate and to oppress. We want to see America forced to turn inward, to look at the rot within its own borders, to face the crimes that it has committed against its own people. The government will have no choice but to rehabilitate itself, to reform its institutions, the institutions that they have used to oppress their own citizens for far too long, because those entities that control your government, government today, those private sector entities, will lose their dominance. Our struggle is not just about the immediate effects that sanctions, for example, might bring, but long-term change. We're fighting for a world where the U.S. is no longer the center of the world, when the power of the dollar is diminished, when global trade is realigned with the people, not just the corporations. And within America, we're fighting for a future where the government is forced to serve its people, to protect their rights, to ensure their dignity. A world where America is held accountable for its crimes, both abroad and at home. A world where the American people are liberated from the domination of corporate power, where the government is forced to rehabilitate itself, to end mass incarceration, to end police brutality, to end all of their domestic violations of international law, and behave like a civilized nation among all of the other nations of the world, not as a global hegemon that thinks that it is above the law and acts above the law even with regards to their own citizens. Wallahi, the day will come, and it won't be long, when America is no longer the master of the world, but just a nation among nations, and will be accountable to the people that it has oppressed for so long. And on that day, the American people will be free, truly free, for the first time in their history. And that begins with you signing the petition, the Article 6 petition for the invocation of Article 6, and it begins with the expulsion of the United States from the United Nations.
Okay, there you have it. That's Mr. Bolson. I'm coming to you now from the book written by a sister called Dr. Joy DeGould. She wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And I'm coming to you from page 21, the part that says the myth of race. Now, I want you to pay close attention to this right here before I read to you. And it may be a good idea if you have some paper and pencil handy, and that way you can take some notes on this stuff. But the author is Dr. Joy DeGould, Be the Healing, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. So get you a copy of that book, and I'll be coming to you right now from The Myth of Race on page 21 in that book. It states the following. Here's a little test. What are the races of humanity? Perhaps you came up with a list that looks like this, using identification by colors: black, white, brown, yellow, red. Or maybe you are more politically correct, and your list may have looked like this: African, European, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, Latino, Pacific Islander. Or perhaps you're really, really reaching back and came up with Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. Despite our constant everyday use of the term race and our reference to various races, the biology of human beings is such that there are no real differences between humans. Race is frequently characterized by the skin color, hair texture, facial features, etc. These differences are offered as examples of how we should differ as humans. This underlying assumption is that there is a genetic biological component to distinctions and define the races. This assumption simply is not true. One cannot separate people into racial groups based upon any set of physical characteristics. Attempting to do so is fraught with contradictions. The Bushmen of Southern Africa look as much Asian as do African. Pacific Islanders have both African and Asian features. The Innu of Japan look more European than Asian. The Lapps of Scandinavia look as much like Eskimos as do Europeans. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia, who often look African, commonly have very straight and wavy hair and are frequently blonde as children. These are just a few of the problems one runs into when arguing for the existence of biological and racial differences. There are many other among them, dark-skinned people from India or Egyptians, who run the gamut from European-looking to African. And how do we identify those from the Middle East? There is, however, hope for those who must differentiate people by race. Now I'm going to stop right there and we'll come back and we'll read a little bit more of this right here. And if you got anything to say, go ahead and type it into the chat room and I'll get in there. But right now, I'm going to go to another commercial break and I will be right back. Y'all hold on a minute.
Let me make sure I got this one right also. Someone tells you that you must pay them money about your children in the form of child support. They also say they would suspend your driver's license. And they said they would garnish your wages. Who were they talking to? A debtor? Or did they make the mistake and say it to a creditor? When you got married, they say they was a part of that also. Request my free report at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Let's have some fun. Fill out the contact us form for my free report, and I'll rush it straight to your email box. What about this banking stuff? What's going on in the United States? I tell you what, request my free report at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace.
At the door, somebody's ringing the bell. Someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell. Do me a favor, open the door and let me in. Oh, child, let those beautiful people in. Someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell. Someone's knocking at the door, someone's playing on the bell. Do me a favor, open the door and let them in. Oh, child, let the soulful people in. Only Williams was my twin. Elijah and Malcolm, still our friends. Brother Martin, we can't forget John, Bobby and Meggan, Louis Armstrong. Lord, now y'all let the folks in, let the folks in, they've been washing their sins. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. When these rights are destroyed over long periods of time, it is your duty to destroy or abolish that government. Only Williams was my twin. Elijah and in my gin. But America is in a unique position. She's the only country in history in a position actually to become involved in a bloodless revolution. The only way we're going to solve it, we got to unite. We got to work together in unity and harmony. Pauline Williams was McQueen, Elijah Malcolm, still on friends, Brother Martin, we can't forget John, Bobby Baker, Louis Armstrong. Right now, someone's knocking at the door. Somebody's ringing the bell and pushing hard. Somebody's ringing at the door. Somebody's ringing the bell and kicking hard. Do me a favor, open the door. And let the folks in, let the folks in, let the folks in, let the folks in. Somebody better open the door. Somebody's ringing the bell. Somebody better open the door. Somebody's ringing the bell. Do me a favor, open up the door, open up the door. Let the folk of people in. We got to let them know and one at a time.
Everybody, we're back. Before we get down into this thing, I have something I want you to understand. What I'm doing here is I'm going back and bringing up some stuff to smooth out the edges, so to speak, of some things that we know that we may have forgotten. Okay, and so before we come with anything else, I'm going back over here to this post-traumatic slave syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGoe, and it states here, earwax. Yes, earwax. As far as we know, it seems that East Asian people have dry earwax and the rest of the population have moist earwax. So if it is important to you to group people by physical characteristics, there's something you can hang your hat on. James King, author of The Biology of Race, sums the discussion of race up best. He states the following: race is a concept of society that insists there is genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classifications. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of race. Okay? And unfortunately, while the notion of race is illusionary, the fact of racism in America is not. Whenever I ask an audience of people if they know what the term racism means, they almost universally say they do. I often give a test to determine if anyone in the same is everyone on the same page regarding the term. I first ask my audience if whites can be racist. Of course, everybody agrees they can. I then ask if blacks can be racist, and I get the same response. I then asked them to identify the ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people as a group, and the list form. My attitude tells me my audience tells me that blacks are impacted economically through discriminatory hiring practices, having little or no access to capital. Blacks are seen as lacking business acumen. They are impacted by limited access to health care. They are impacted by overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and underrepresentation in the university system. They are impacted by redlining and other discriminatory practices, barring them from finding houses in areas of their choice. The list goes on. I then asked them to identify how black racism adversely impacts lives of white people as a group in their styles. Now we're going to get back to this right here. So let's go on down in this thing, get on down into the nuts, bolts, and wiggle pins of this evening discussion. And I want you to pay very close attention to what this brother said, even though he said it a long time ago. Think about the thinking of this particular man. Okay? Here we go.
Today, in our discussion of minority groups, we have with us two guests. One is Minister Malcolm X. Shabazz, one of the top leaders of the Nation of Islam, or the so-called black Muslims. And we also have Mr. Herman Blake, one of the teaching assistants in the course. We will discuss today some of the goals and some of the strategies of the Nation of Islam. And I wonder if Mr. Blake might start it off by asking Mr. Shabazz a question.
Minister Malcolm, the thing that I thought might be good for starting it off is to talk about one of the most pervasive beliefs in the general society about the Nation of Islam, and that is that it is an organization dedicated to the use of violent means to attain its goals. The question I have is, how true is this, and why do you think it persists in society?
Well, the Muslims who have accepted the religion of Islam and follow the religious guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have never bombed any churches, have never murdered any little girls, as was done in Birmingham, have never lynched anybody, have never at any time been guilty of initiating any aggressive acts of violence during the entire 33 years or more that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been teaching us. The charge of violence against us actually stems from the guilt complex that exists in the conscious and subconscious minds of most white people in this country. They know that they've been violent in their brutality against Negroes, and they feel that someday the Negro is going to wake up and try and do unto them as they have done unto the whites as the whites have done unto us. We aren't a violent group. We are taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to obey the law, to respect everyone who respects us. We're taught to display courtesy, to be polite. But we're also taught that at any time anyone in any way inflicts or seeks to inflict violence upon us, we are within our religious rights to retaliate in self-defense to the maximum degree of our ability. We never initiate any violence upon anyone, but if anyone attacks us, we reserve the right to defend ourselves. So to accuse us of being violent is like accusing a man who is being lynched, who is being hung on a tree, simply because he struggles vigorously against his lyncher the victim is accused of violence, but the lyncher is never accused of violence. And I only point this out because the various racist groups that are set up in this country by whites and who have actually practiced violence against blacks for 400 years are never associated or identified or made synonymous with the term violence. But whites speak of Muslims almost synonymously with violence. Whenever Muslims are mentioned by them, violence is brought up. But it's not connected with any other group. This is a sort of a propaganda tactic, or what I would call psychological warfare, to in some way make the image of the Muslims in this country be a violent image rather than a religious image.
I'd like to ask a question in that regard. What's interesting is that members of the Nation of Islam have not used violence even when black Americans were attacked. How do you account for this? Does this in any way contradict some of the basic premises of your movement?
I don't know how you mean.
Well, you maintain, for example, that you will not, or that you should not use violence unless you are attacked by the white man. And I think we can note in the last several years, certainly, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances in which Negroes have been attacked, killed in some instances.
You mean in these demonstrations?
These demonstrations and the bombings, for example, recently in Birmingham where they killed 4 little Negro girls. And what interests me is the fact is that the Nation of Islam has not done anything to retaliate.
I think you should be happy.
The important thing is, does your lack of action contradict any of your basic principles?
I'll explain it. You should be happy that Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, don't believe in any form of integration, and who believe that every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate, and we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believed that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other so-called judicial bodies were for real when they talked about integration, we would integrate. And knowing that the law was on our side, and any effort we made to demonstrate toward integration, why, we would know the law should be on our side, if it's the law of the land. If it is the law of the land, then the demonstrators are within the law, and the discriminators are against the law. But to show you the hypocrisy of the law, when Negroes demonstrate for integration, instead of arresting the discriminators, the law arrests the demonstrators. So this is a foolish move on the part of Negroes. And when you foolishly get yourself involved with an enemy, then whatever comes upon you, that's your business. As Muslims, we believe that separation is the best way and the only sensible way, not integration. And but on the other hand, when we see our people being brutalized by white bigots, white racists, we think that they are foolish to allow themselves to be beaten and brutalized and do nothing whatsoever to protect themselves. They are foolish. They should have the right to defend themselves against any attack made against them by anyone. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog. Whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be his, then that black man should kill that dog, or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on it.
Should other black men help that particular person who was attacked?
I think you'll find, sir, that there will come a time when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together. And then at that point, you'll have a situation where when you attack one black man, you are attacking all black men. And this type of black thinking will cause all black people to stick together. And this type of thinking also will bring an end to the brutality inflicted upon black people by white people. And it is the only thing that will bring an end to it. No federal court, state court, or city court will bring an end to it. It's something that the black man has to bring an end to himself.
Minister Malcolm, let me, on the basis of your two remarks, ask a double-pronged question. One, is it then your assertion that the laws with respect to how Negroes are supposed to have equal opportunity and equal rights in this country are not meaningful or believed by whites? And secondly, what then is your opinion and attitude toward the civil rights movement in general, and particularly the Reverend Martin Luther King and his philosophy of nonviolent direct action?
If the white people really passed meaningful laws, it would not be necessary to pass any more laws. There are already enough laws on the law books to protect an American citizen. You only need additional laws when you're dealing with someone who is not regarded as an American citizen. But whites are so hypocritical. They don't want to admit that this black man is not a citizen. So they classify him as a second-class citizen to get around making him a real citizen. If he was a real citizen, you'd need no more laws. You'd need no civil rights legislation. Civil rights is, when you have civil rights, you have citizenship. It's automatic. White people don't need laws to protect their citizenship because they're citizens. But they don't want to tell us we're not citizens. And at the same time, they don't want to pass laws that are meaningful enough to protect us as if we were citizens. And the Supreme Court desegregation decision is the best example I know. That's a law from the Supreme Court. 10 years have gone by. No desegregated schools. It hasn't been implemented beyond, I think, 9% in 10 years. So this just shows you the hypocrisy of the American white man. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. And for this reason, we who are Muslims, that is, who believe in the religion of Islam, who believe in God, we don't believe that black people will ever get any laws, get any problem with laws being passed or new persons being put in office, white liberals being put in office. There is nothing that the white man will ever do to bring about true, sincere citizenship or civil rights recognition for black people in this country. Nothing will they ever do. They will always talk it, but they won't practice it. And with the Supreme Court, if the NAACP can tell me that they want a desegregation decision for me 10 years ago, but yet the schools haven't been desegregated, as I say, this is a victory with no victory. It's a victory that you can talk about, but it's a victory you can't show me. So if you represent the NAACP and you are telling me about this great victory you won for me, when I look at you, I have to conclude that either you have been duped yourself or else you are trying to dupe me. And in most instances where the civil rights struggle is involved, there is no civil rights leader can point to me one concrete gain, practical gain, that black people have made in the civil rights field in this country, not only during the past 10 years, but during the past 100 years.
Now, the other part was with respect to Mr. King and the nonviolent direct action.
Well, I will let Jimmy Baldwin and John Killens and Lou Lomax, the writers, answer that. Speaking right after this church was bombed in Birmingham, Christian church was bombed in Birmingham by Christians too, mind you, and these 4 little girls were murdered. John Killens and James Baldwin and Lomax and the Negro writers and actors had a meeting at the town hall in New York. And Killens pointed out, concerning these murders of these little girls, said The killings had raised doubts about the intelligence of the nonviolence in the civil rights struggle. He went on to declare that he could no longer be asked to love those who persecuted and killed Negroes. He also, and the writer, Mr. Handler, who's describing this, said that Killens, it was not clear concerning Killens' remarks to his audience that he was breaking with it was clear rather to his audience that he was breaking with the doctrine of the Reverend Martin Luther King's philosophy that as Christians, Negroes should love their fellow man in a truly religious sense. Now, James Baldwin, speaking on that same platform, said, and I was present during this entire affair, asserted that the American people shared a collective guilt for the persecution of Negroes, much as Germans did because of their silence during the Nazi persecution. He denounced President Kennedy for what he termed Kennedy's lack of passion in the civil rights struggle. Mr. Baldwin said that there could no longer be a Republican Party for the Negro people as long as it listed a Barry Goldwater, nor a Democratic Party for the Negro people with a Senator Eastland on its roster. He asserted that the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, that unless the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, future slaughter would make Birmingham look like a dress rehearsal. And now, what do I think about King's attitude? King's right-hand man, Wyatt Walker, at King's convention, according to the New York Times on September the 26th, said, quote, "We have been duped," meaning these persons involved in the civil rights struggle, of which King is the symbolic leader. His right-hand man says, and I quote, "We have been duped, or have duped ourselves, into believing that the chains have been broken, when in truth we have only been chained more securely. Half freedom has in many instances been worse than no freedom at all." Why, don't ask me what I think about their struggle. I can tell you what they think about their struggle. And they are pointing out that it is becoming more difficult every day for the civil rights leaders to keep the masses of black people nonviolent and long-suffering and patient and keep them from becoming disenchanted. I hope that answers your question.
Well, now there's a new party which has started on the East Coast called the Freedom Now Party, an all-black organization. Would you comment upon this and also upon the possibility that the Nation of Islam might begin to turn some of its attention to the political arena in view of the fact that it is in the political arena that Negroes have not been able to in any way get justice, as has been pointed out in your previous statement?
I'm not familiar with the Freedom Now Party. I'm not too familiar with politics, period, only that in the sense that white politicians have usually been very hypocritical where the so-called Negroes are concerned. So I'm a bit disenchanted with politicians and politics. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a religious man, and his teaching is religious and his solutions are religious. The Freedom Now Party, from what I understand, is headed by a lawyer named Conrad Lynn. Mm-hmm. I know him, which probably means well. Before passing an opinion on what it is he's trying to do, I would like to analyze it and see who's subsidizing him, see who his friends are, especially who his white friends are. And after a careful analysis, if I could conclude that there was no white support, I would be inclined to have confidence in it. But if I saw him leaning too heavily upon his white liberal friends for support, then I'd be suspicious of that too. The Muslims, in my opinion, represent an all-black party. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad pointed out at before 10,000 in Philadelphia on September the 29th at a rally that we were having, that in 1964 the black people should band together and do something about selecting and electing representatives, black representatives, politically, who have the rights and the best interests of the black people at heart, and that we should also unite together and sweep out of office all of the black political puppets who are used by the white power structure to continue white supremacy in our communities.
In that regard, would you include Congressman Dawson, for example, from Chicago, and some of the people who represent him on the Chicago City Council?
In which regard?
in the area of acting as a puppet?
I don't know what Mr. Muhammad's opinion is of Congressman Dawson. They both live right there in the city of Chicago together. I don't know what his opinion is of Congressman Dawson. I'm suspicious of any Negro, be he politician, be he clergyman, or civic leader who is constantly patted on the back by whites. I have a tendency to lead toward the Negro politician who is constantly condemned by the white power structure. This is my thought pattern. I'm giving you an insight of it.
You, though, mentioned Mr. Lynn and saying you'd like to know who his white friends are. Now, I'm wondering if you didn't make a contradictory statement in Muslim terms by using white and friend in the same phrase. That is
I use friend in quotes.
I see. In other words, if a black man cannot have a white man as a friend.
He may have a white man who's friendly, but being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white.
Okay, we back, everybody. All right, now let me go on down here, back where I was in Dr. Joy DeGore's book, Be the Healing, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. Now, we're still over here on page 22, and at the bottom of the page, it says, because while black people may have prejudices and at times even feel hatred toward white people, perhaps even causing many fear, the reality is that black people lack the power to affect the lives of white people as a group. Black people's feelings toward white people do not preclude a white person's ability to get along, receive fair treatment by the justice system, acquire education, etc., etc. This then is racism. It is the belief that people differ along biological and genetic lines and that one's own group is superior to another group. This belief is coupled with the power of negativity, affect the lives of those perceived to be inferior. America's history is inextricably bound to the racist ideology, from the codifying of slavery to the belief in its manifest destiny to the treatment of illegal immigrants. Many of America's actions continue to collect with this creed that all men are created equal. Okay, there you have it. And I'm going to be coming back, let's see, we'll be down here with knowing ourselves when I come back. But in the meantime, I'm going to deal with this other brother because we need to get on down into the meat and potatoes of the reason why we're having this broadcast is about the mental health and the cognitive dissonance of those who believe they are black. Now, of course, I know you all know me. You know, I'm not black, not Negro, not colored, not African American. I'm not multicultural. I don't eat your meat. I don't serve your God. I don't own a suit and tie. I'm not trying. I don't listen to your rock and roll. I cook my own food. I don't participate in your holidays. Now that's just me. Okay. I have all the equipment that I need. I can have the skill to knock the eyelashes off a buffalo at 100 yards with a high-powered rifle when he's moving. And that's just me. Okay. And I think the children should be trained and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, let's get on down into the meat and potatoes of what this is about. We're going to deal directly with the mental health. But in the meantime, let's do two little things right here, and then we're down in there.
Imagine living in a world where a drop of ancestry could dictate your entire life. This principle was known as the one-drop rule, a concept deeply rooted in American history, and its echoes still reverberate today in the way that we view mixed-race individuals, people like Barack Obama, Tiger Woods, and Kamala Harris. Poet Langston Hughes noted in his memoir, saying that in the U.S., a Negro was used to describe anyone with black ancestry, whereas in Africa, it referred to someone that was fully black. Well, today we're going to talk about the history of the one-drop rule. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Also, you like the channel, find our Patreon page in the description below. But without further ado, let's get started. The one-drop rule is a social and legal principle of classification that has historical prominence in the United States. The rule asserted that a person with just one drop of African ancestry was considered black, regardless of their physical appearance. The origins and implications of this rule were deeply intertwined with history of slavery, segregation, and racial dynamics in America. This idea dates back to 1662 Virginia law that laid the groundwork for over 3 centuries of racial categorization. This law set out to meticulously dictate the social standing of mixed-race individuals. One famous historical case involves President Thomas Jefferson. DNA evidence and historical records believe that he had at least 6 mixed-race children with his enslaved concubine, Sally Hemings. Sally was predominantly white and was the half-sister of Jefferson's wife. 4 of these 6 children lived to adulthood, and even though they were mostly of European ancestry, which would have made them legally white had they been born free, Virginia's law at the time considered them to be enslaved because their mother was enslaved. In colonial America, where you fell on the racial spectrum was not just about how you looked, it determined your very existence. Dark skin, broad noses, and tightly coiled hair were more than physical attributes. They were symbols that branded you socially inferior. This crude categorization enforced a brutal hierarchy. White meant freedom, black meant enslavement, and it was fairly straightforward. But life is rarely that simple. Extensive racial mixing blurred these rigid lines of race and status. Records as early as 1630 showed these anxieties. Colonists, Hugh Davis, for instance, was publicly whipped for having sexual relations with a black woman. Interracial relationships, although rampant, faced harsh punishments, and any white person caught in such an act faced public humiliations and reprisals. This mixing posed a significant problem for white supremacy at a time when, in many places, blacks outnumbered whites. There was a palpable fear among whites of losing control of their enslaved population. Therefore, keeping white supremacy pure became an obsessive goal. These white anxieties about racial mixing was tied to eugenics and scientific racism, both claiming the superiority of the white race and painting blackness as a contaminant. To protect this ideology, it was critical to keep the color lines firm and clear. Thus, miscegenation laws were born. These laws made interracial marriage and sometimes even sex a criminal act. Although these laws appeared to police interactions between different races, they primarily sought to regulate the behaviors of white people. Essentially, because blacks were already enslaved, these laws ensured that whites adhered to this manufactured boundary of racial purity. The impact of these laws well beyond human relationships. They also shaped legal definitions of race. Many people who had mixed ancestry looked white, and because they were mostly of European descent, they were considered legally white. Different states had legal variations of what it meant to be black or white. For example, in 1822, a law of Virginia said that to be called a mulatto, a term that was borrowed from the Portuguese and the Spanish, which comes from the Latin word meaning mule, person needed to have at least 1/4 of black ancestry. The Nat Turner Rebellion, 1831, Virginia made new rules limiting the freedoms of freed black people. However, they didn't establish the one-drop rule right away. In 1853, when this rule was suggested, lawmakers realized that it could negatively impact many people who were already legally considered white. Over time, however, these rules changed. By 1910, Virginia updated this law to someone who had 1/16 black ancestry, and by 1930, any African descent at all meant that a person was legally considered black. Contrasting with Virginia's stance on racial definition, New Orleans exhibited a more nuanced approach. New Orleans in particular has a long history of racial classification. This city had created a multi-tiered system, quite distinct from the binary classifications that you would see elsewhere. Whites held the highest status, blacks held the lowest, but in between there was something called the Creoles of color, and they had carved out an intermediate of that precarious social status. These Creoles were the product of generations of intermixing between whites, Africans, and the indigenous people. Unlike other regions, interracial relationships were more tolerated and somewhat encouraged in colonial Louisiana. In this in-between class, Creoles functioned as a buffer, helping whites maintain their dominance while keeping unmixed blacks firmly in their place. Creole children often received recognition and even freedoms from their white fathers. This acknowledgement allowed many Creoles to rise to positions of privilege and be ingratiated into the elite class. Within this status came a sense of superiority over blacks, despite the fact that many of them had black ancestry. This is where it gets even more intricate, because Louisiana developed an even more intricate caste system based on fractions of black ancestry. This is where you would see terms like quadroon, octoroon, and griffé. These were used to describe the exact portion of black and white lineage that a person had. This granularity highlights how desperately society clung to these racial distinctions, even though the lines were incredibly blurred. After the Civil War, Southern states created laws to enforce segregation and limit the rights of black people, stripping them of their right to vote and political participation. Between 1890 and 1908, these laws were passed by all former Confederate states and maintained until the 1960s. This notion of the one-drop rule was crystallized in 1896 when the Supreme Court in its infamous Plessy versus Ferguson decision. This upheld the segregationist laws that established the separate but equal doctrine. This ruling triggered by the case of Homer Plessy, a man that was considered black under Louisiana law due to him being 1/8 black. This cemented the legal foundation for racial discrimination. Between 1910 and 1930, states like Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi adopted the one-drop rule, while other states practiced it de facto. This period was marked by legal enforcement of racial segregation and extended well into the 20th century, embedding systemic racism deeply into the fabric of American society. Fast forward to the 1940s, where individuals like Walter Pecker in Virginia and Nomi Drake in Louisiana took the one-drop rule to even further draconian measures, warping records and erasing the rich heritage of countless families. Pecker's chilling belief that there was a higher race and that race must be protected from the lessers. Pecker's Racial Integration Act, which passed in Virginia in 1924, this new law prohibited interracial marriage and ushered in a long period of racial discrimination administered by the Virginia government. Walter Pecker, as head of Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics, Pecker was responsible for ensuring that all infants born in Virginia received birth certificates that included their racial designation. He was an active eugenist and used bureaucracy as a weapon against black and indigenous people all across the state. Yet, amid this tapestry of oppression, there emerged sparks of hope and resilience. The civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s started to dismantle this legal segregation and pushed against century-old barriers. The landmark 1967 Supreme Court decision in Loving v. Virginia was a watershed moment, striking down Virginia's ban on interracial marriages and the underlying prejudicial principles of Pecker's Racial Integration Act. This ruling marked a crucial victory in the fight for racial and decades of systemic discrimination and the erasure of mixed-race identity. Interestingly, the one-drop rule was not unique to the United States and did find parallels in other societies with histories of race mixing, such as Latin America. Also in Nazi Germany, the Nuremberg laws came up with a system determining who belonged to what group that was based on the one-drop rule. This allowed Nazis to criminalize marriage and sex between Jewish people and Aryans. But rather than adopting the one-drop rule, Nazis decreed that a Jewish person was anyone who had 3 or more Jewish grandparents. Even today, the remnants of the one-drop rule persist in our societal consciousness. Take, for instance, the story of Rachel Dolezal, a controversy that triggered a national debate about the authenticity of racial identity, and the 2000 census allow individuals to identify with more than one race for the first time. The history of the one-drop rule encapsulates the complexities and contradictions of America's racial history. It is a testament to the ways in which laws and social norms can crystallize racial boundaries that are essentially just social constructs. And it highlights the ongoing struggle to navigate and dismantle these rigid classifications in the pursuit of a more equitable society. Thank you. This has been One Mic Black History, and this is the story of the one-drop rule. Like stories like this, you can find more stories like this on OneMicHistory.com. Also, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd like to thank all my Patreon subscribers. Without you, none of this could be possible. Peace.
Okay. Now we know where that came from. All right. Now, I would like to state at the outset, it's time for me to bring in the heavyweights. But let us get a clear and concise definition of cognitive dissonance. And we're going to get this here from YouTube. It states the following cognitive dissonance definition. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs, values, and attitudes. Learn how it affects your thoughts, feelings, and actions, and how to cope with it in different ways. Okay? All right. We want to put that in there before we get down into the heavyweights. And I have another commercial to run, and then we'll be right back. Y'all hold on a minute.
If it is against the law for the bank to loan out depositors' money to you, how could the bank give you a loan? And if that's the case, how are they able to keep their doors open? And in some cities, they have the biggest buildings in town. What happens to the person who deposits money in the bank? What do they receive outside of nickels and dimes in the form of what's called interest? How can you get paid? Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form, and I'll rush you my free report. Let's get down to the bottom of this situation. Let me show you what's going on in how to deal with it. Okay, TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace, y'all.
Okay, we're back. Now, I'm going to bring in heavyweight number 1. Okay, y'all hold your hats, and it certainly would be a good idea if you had paper and pencil on this one here. This is, in my personal opinion, one of the good. I think the brother was way ahead of his time, but he was sure dead on time, and I wish he was still here with us. But y'all hold your hat. Okay?
I think it makes us question whether segregation itself was really the cause of the feeling of inferiority in black children and in black people, as we thought. It'll make us question also what I think was a naive belief, that if we integrated with the whites, somehow they would stop seeing us as people of color or as black people. If we integrated with the whites, somehow the world would stop dividing itself up in terms of race. That somehow the world's division of itself in terms of African people and European people, black people and white people and so forth would somehow end. I think this study clearly implies then that this is not the case. I think it implies on a deeper level that inferiority in black people is a political and social necessity. I often, in speaking to my colleagues and others who are interested in psychology, and of course in the current book that I'm trying to develop now, get across the idea of how black psychology differs, particularly black psychology at this time, differs from Eurocentric psychology. And I think one of the major ways that it differs from Eurocentric psychology is that when we talk about abnormality in the black personality, when we talk about feelings of inferiority in black people, feelings of self-hatred and self-alienation, feelings of incompetence, feelings of powerlessness and so forth that we hear a lot about, we must recognize that these feelings are a political and economic necessity. And we should start from that premise if we are to understand the psychology of black people. I often put it this way. In order for us to be in the state that we are in today as people, we have to be out of our minds. We literally have to be crazy. It is necessary for us to be crazy. It is necessary for us to be backwards. It is necessary for us to be maladjusted. It is necessary for us to be disunited. It is necessary for us to be self-hating. It is necessary for us to be filled with an inferiority complex. In a world where the European is essentially about 10% of the world's population, if that 10% is to continue to rule over the other 90%, it must keep that 90% out of its mind. It must keep that 90% in a state of deception. It must keep that 90% filled with a feeling of powerlessness and incompetence. If this 10% is to continue to consume more than 60% of the world's resources, if this 10% is to continue to rob African, Asian, and other nations of their material wealth, then it must keep those people in a state of maladjustment. And this implies then that no matter how much integration you may bring about, the feeling of inferiority must be a constant in the black personality. No matter how many people you run for president, no matter how many mayors you get elected, no matter how many people you get on the board of IBM and the others, the basic sense of inferiority, the basic sense of dependency must remain a constant in the black mind. And I will indicate this, and I think this study, which occurred now some 40 years later, shows this to be the case. Dr. Clark shows surprise that after all of this time, this feeling is still there. I would not, and I don't think any student who's basically looked at the necessity of black people being out of their minds as being the foundation of European dominance would not be surprised. I think it was quite predictable. Remember, these children have this feeling of inferiority basically from the end of their second years. You can pick up this sense of inferiority as early as 3.5 years old. So it starts very early. And I'm still working through my mind the implications of that finding. We are talking about preschool children, not only children that are in school, but children who are having this feeling prior to school. This would, of course, indicate that to a degree that our environment is saturated with racism through TV, through the various media, through the pictures our walls, through the unconscious and conscious state, and influence the child's behavior and attitude starting in the womb itself. And I often start my developmental classes not with the prenatal period and how egg meets sperm, but with why do you have children in the first place? Because the reasons you have children will influence their development. It will influence them from the time they're in your womb until, of course, the day they die upon this earth. It would indicate then that to a degree and in some way the black community itself has been induced in helping to bring about a feeling of inferiority in its children. To a good extent, it is not so much the actions of racism that destroy us, the discrimination by white folk and Europeans, the kind of hatred that they express toward us as people that destroys us and gives us an inferiority complex. It is to a good degree how we as people react to these actions. Whether we believe the propaganda or not, whether we believe what the European actually has said. We cannot often control the behavior of other people, but we do have a greater control over how we react to that behavior. And to a good extent, the challenge of an Afrocentric education is to educate us in our tendencies to react. To a good extent, it would mean that the actions of racism apparently have induced some of us to accept racist propaganda and to really believe it, to internalize it. Once we internalize the propaganda, then we become social agents for the racists themselves. And to a good extent, then, the black family, once it internalizes the propaganda of Eurocentric racists, becomes a social agent for the racists and begins to produce the kinds of children that the racists want from the time of conception onward. It becomes instructive, you see, to look at a family not as something that just raises children, but a family to a good extent is the social agent of the society. It produces the kinds of children that the society says it needs and wants. The family looks out at the opportunity structure, at its own social position. It looks out at what it views as the future for its children, for its group, for its nation, and it inculcates those views into its children and rears its children in terms of those views, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. And in that way, it begins to create the children for the society. In a heavily segregated society, for instance, if your black boy or girl would have said some years ago that they wanted to be president of the United States or that they were going to be president of the United States, how many of us, by being realistic, would have discouraged that view? You know, ain't no black man going to be this or no black woman going to be that. Be real. And in the service of being real, by saying, well, I don't want him to be disappointed. I want to save him from racism and save him from the recognition one day that there are limitations to his aspirations. We quietly steer them toward a trade or a skill. Get this and get a job. So you, what's happening there? While it may have a realistic basis in a certain sort of way, you are also at the same time, though, creating the child's aspirations. You're also creating the child's motivations. You're creating the child's view of itself in line with the way the society is structured. A true Afrocentric family not only relates to its children in terms of reality, but it relates to its children in terms of idealism. It relates in the sense that there is a world that it as an African family and we as an African people want to bring about. While the black man may not be president of the United States, it does not mean that he cannot rule the world. The true Afrocentric family then not only raises its children in terms of the so-called social realities, because it recognizes that social realities are things that men create. themselves. And therefore it raises children to create a reality suitable to the advancement and development of black people. But an unconscious black family, an unconscious people, a people who fallen victim to racism, a people who fallen victim to a sense of inferiority, then will produce the kind of inferior children that the white society needs to continue its dominance in the world. And in this way, then, the black family and the black community and black leadership becomes allied with the dominant group and with the Eurocentric group. It is this kind of thing that we must come to become conscious of and to defeat consciously. If we say that the patterns of behavior that the individual learns in coping with the environment, then we can infer from that then that the kind of environment the individual inhabits will influence the kind and patterns of behavior he will evidence as a person. An individual then who is seeking for power, who then wants to create people so that they would have a definite relationship to him, will say then that the first thing I must control is what? The environment. I must create an environment, because the individual, if he's to survive in that environment, must learn to cope with it. And if it's a tough environment, he must learn to be tough if he's going to make it. If it's an environment that requires him to hustle, then he's got to learn how to hustle. And he's got to learn how to... And yet, as he learns all of these things, they're going to become a part of his personality. And in ways they're going to help him, and in ways they're going to stand against him. And therefore, if I create the environment, I can, to a good extent, create the individual. And therefore, the people in power will read this statement, and they will go back to their planning boards and say, how can I create the environment such that black people will be dumb? They will be ignorant. They will hate themselves. They will lack disunity in their relationships one with the other. They will see me as the final validator of truth. They will see my acceptance as the ultimate acceptance. How can I create in them that mentality? And you will see them then creating the appropriate environment. The invasion of this community by Asians and other ethnic groups is a part of the creation of the mentality and personality of black people. It's going to create your children out here. As they walk down these blocks, their personality is being formed as they learn to so-called cope and deal with this situation out here. And to the extent that we sit back and let it happen, to that extent, we're participating also in their creation. It goes on to say, for social learning theorists, behavior is the result of a continuous interaction between personal and environmental variables. Environmental conditions shape behavior through learning. A person's behavior, in turn, shapes the environment. There's a reciprocal relationship. We create the environment and we create a behavior orientation. And then the person with the behavior orientation, what? Recreates his environment. You put him in a slum, and then he develops slummy behavior. And then once he develops slummy behavior, he will make slums wherever he goes. And then we will say that he's a slummy person by nature. You know, that's the game. Create it. Create that environment so as to create the personality. And you see, it's a slick game. And often you see as people, we are not aware of the first creation. How was the first creation brought about? The only thing we often see as the result of the creation. And we see ourselves behaving in a certain sort of way, and the other group then says, you behave that way because you're black. You behave that way because you're African. You see? And when you fail then to see how the situation was created, then one begins to condemn himself in terms just of himself. And this is why knowledge of how the situation was created is very, very important. This is why ultimately when one gets to know himself, he gets to know other people. You cannot know yourself well and not know other people and ultimately know the universe. The route to getting to know the universe and to getting to know what is going on in the world is through the self, ladies and gentlemen. Because, as I stated before, the self is the result of the universe we live in. And therefore, self-knowledge means getting to know self-creation. And when other people have created the self that one is, then it means getting to know those other people and getting to know how they went about their creation. And that's very important to the recreation of oneself in terms of one's own criteria and one's own values. But unless you get there, and this, you see, is an essential part of African education. The white people don't have to learn this. They don't need to learn this. So therefore, they do not include this knowledge into their curriculum. They do not see it as an important part of education. And a black person then who does not include this as an important part of their education is going to be educated into ignorance and stupidity. And a black person who sees this kind of education as a stop course, as a, what do you call them, elective, of course you pick up on the side, is one that's going to be miseducated. This is the very foundation and basis of any sound education and should occur first, not second, not in the third year of college, not in the last year of college, but should occur in the very first semester, should occur really in the very first years of elementary school and work themselves right on up. And so we have it here. The environmental conditions shape behavior through learning. A person's behavior in turn shapes the environment. Persons and situations influence each other reciprocally. To predict behavior, we need to know how the characteristics of the individual interact with the characteristics of the situation. Now, I've often told people the point of psychology, European psychology, is control. You know, a lot of people talk about psychology not being so-called science and not being able to predict behavior the way chemistry and mathematics. That's off the point. That's really not the point of it at all. Because the point of psychology in the Eurocentric sense is not really to describe man as he is, but to learn the ways and means of controlling man to the benefit of the European. That's the basic point. And when you can create people, when you can control people, then your problem of prediction is what? It's solved, ladies and gentlemen. It's solved. You see? So when you remove people, you remove certain thinking skills from people, when you induce into them certain emotional orientations, when you keep away from them certain intelligence in terms of knowledge, you're creating a personality, and you can begin to predict how those people are most likely to behave under certain circumstances. You know what they are, what's capable of doing. You see? And therefore, as a Eurocentric psychologist, what you're mainly concerned with is not so much predicting the behavior, but creating the possibilities of some behaviors and the impossibilities of others. And so the main thing you're concerned with is the techniques by which this is accomplished, because the prediction part will pretty much take care of itself. And so we have it right here. To predict, we need to know how the characteristics of the individual interact with the characteristics of the situation. You have to interpret this Afrocentrically, you see. Now, many courses will read it and run it through just like that and leave it at that. But see, the white boy, that's all he needs. He doesn't need the other part, the part that I've just talked to you about right now. Because you see, while he's in the college, his dad is another who's already manipulated the world. You see, and when he gets out, he will enter into that system and learn the real information. But the black one who will learn it as well or better will still be in a position of powerlessness. You see, because often he has not read between the lines, and often because he's discriminated against, he will not get into the very center of power where he can see the real deal. And so he'll be left with his theoretical propositions, and he'll be proud of his unrealistic learning. And he will talk about it and think that his degree, because it is equal to some white man's degree, that it has equal potency, and it does not. It has very little meaning. In fact, that is a part of the deception as well. It goes on to say, reinforcement and social learning. The effect of other people, the rewards and punishments they provide, is an important influence on an individual's behavior. Very potent statement there, isn't it? In fact, that is a power statement, isn't it? Yeah, it's a power statement. Infused throughout this whole thing is, how do you gain power and influence over other people? How do you manipulate other people? This is a manual about power. Of course, it isn't written that way, is it? It's pure, bland, objective, non-racial psychology. Nonsense. There is no course that's non-political. That is the greatest deception run upon black people, that courses are non-political. That is the most political statement of all. Oh, this is an objective course. It has nothing to do with race, then I'm in the wrong course. According to social learning theory, individual differences in behavior result in large part from differences in the kinds of experiences encountered, listen, in the course of growing up. Do we hear that? Very powerful statement here. What does it say? Individual differences, and when I use the word individual, think of group. This is another deception that is run on black people, particularly in psychology. Because often the psychology is projected as being about individuals. You see, and often the black student then thinks in terms of individuals, and consequently is restricted in what he learns. When you're in these courses and they talk about individuals, elevate them up to the group level. You see, because it's to the advantage of the white man in a sense while he's educating you at the same time to lower your consciousness to talk about individuals, see, so that you can think that we're just concerned with single entities and not with what? Peoples and the relationships of people one to the other. And if you don't deliberately and consciously say, wait a minute, let me think about this in terms of groups, then you're caught and miseducated right at that point, even though you know the principle well. It says individual differences, but let's substitute the word group. Group differences in behavior result in large part from differences in the kinds of learning experiences encountered in the course of growing up. In other words, then, the differences in groups, to a good extent, is the result of the kind of learning experiences they have encountered. So, if you want to create group differences, what do you create? You create differences in their what? Learning experiences. That is why the European, in order to create the African man, must also restrict the African experience, must restrict the kinds of experiences you have. Because an experience is not just an emotional kind of situation, it is a learning situation. An experience becomes often a permanent part of the personality. So you must see experience as learning, okay, not just an emotional effect, but as a learning. When you're in a classroom, you are having an experience. We call that experience learning, but nevertheless, it's an experience. Any kind of experience can be a learning situation. So consequently, if the European is to produce group differences in behavior, he then must have control over the experiences people undergo. And therefore, when they experience poor housing, when they experience poor food, non-nutritional food, when they experience poor schooling, when they experience adverse economic circumstances, when they experience the degradation and scandalization of their character, when they experience the kinds of things we talk about here daily in this community, then you're going to get a difference in group behavior. And you will see then that this experience is deliberately designed to create a deliberate personality in black people. Some of you heard me talk about the rat, and this social learning theory is based on what we call rat psychology. And it's very interesting, by the way, why in these psych books you have talk about rats and dogs. Because often the unaware African thinks that that's what the whole deal is about, rats and dogs. Another consciousness controlling tool. And as soon as you mention conditioning, somebody will jump up, oh, the Pavlovian dog. Either they're going to immediately show you how smart they are in terms of the Pavlovian dog. You see? and how smart they are about the rat and you know, the skin of ox. But if you talk to them for a whole night, they never quite get around to how it is that we are the Pavlovian dog, and that we are the rat. We never see that part. And yet, look at it, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about the so-called skin of rat, it's the rat taken out of its natural habitat, placed in a box. It is placed in a condition, a new set of conditions, a new environment. It's going to have experiences in that box it has never had before in its life. It must learn to survive in that box and cope with that box. It must learn to push that lever in order to eat. It has never had to do that before. Never. But it's got to learn. It's got to learn that when the yellow light comes on, it can push the lever and get food. But when the green one comes on, no food is coming. It has to learn that it can get food every time it pushes the lever, or it gets food every 5th time it pushes the lever, or every 15th time it pushes the lever, or it gets food every 5 minutes, and you can just manipulate its behavior around and around and around. The experimenter says, okay, you're not going to get eat until you hit the bar 5 times, 15 times. And sometimes you can see the rat even learns that, you know. It just doesn't hit the food sometimes steadily. You may hit it fast 15 times. Or the experimenter says, I'm going to feed you every 5 minutes regardless of how many times you hit the bar. And that rat will get a sense of time. I mean, toward the end of that 5 minutes, then it'll start hitting the bar. You see? And you can manipulate and change its behavior in terms of how you're going to reward it and how you're going to punish it. It knows something now, and it behaves now in a way that no other rat behaves. It has learned something new. Why? Because it has been placed under a set of conditions. It has learned to adjust to those conditions and to cope with those conditions. If it went back to its natural habitat, it would be a strange rat, I'm telling you. And we know sometimes how so-called tamed animals, as a result of their social interaction with human beings, are unable to even survive in their natural environment because of the way they had to survive in their natural environment. And so what we recognize in the Skinner experiment is this, that the rat not only lives in a condition and in an environment, the environment and the condition does what? Lives in the rat. And the rat is an expression of its environment. As a matter of fact, the environment and conditions speak through the rat and literally uses its body to express itself. This is why often we can hear some people talk, the way they dress, the way they walk, and tell where they're from. Because we not only live in a neighborhood, ladies and gentlemen, the neighborhood does what? It lives in us. It expresses itself through us. We are its vehicle. It comes out through us. So consequently, when another people shape your neighborhood, and they shape your schools, and they shape the experiences you will have, they are in the process then of creating us as human beings. We have to recognize that. This is why the black student has to look at the rat not as a rat, but as a prototype of himself. And if he does not see that rat that way, he's been miseducated. I don't care how many A's he makes equal to the white boy, he's been miseducated. And yet the white man has sat right there and told him exactly how he's doing it. Exactly. No bones about it. And I often tell my students, look at this rat and this experimenter, not from the point of view of the way it's written in the book. So consequently, when another people shape your neighborhood, and they shape your schools, and they shape the experiences you will have, they are in the process then of creating us as human beings. We have to recognize that. This is why the black student has to look at the rat not as a rat, but as a prototype of himself. And if he does not see that rat that way, he's been miseducated. I don't care how many A's he makes equal to the white boy, he's been miseducated. And yet the white man has sat right there and told him exactly how he's doing it. Exactly. No bones about it. And I often to tell my students, look at this rat and this experimenter, not from the point of view of the way it's written in the book, but look at it as a power relationship. The experimenter is able to create the behavior in this rat as a result of the power that the experimenter has over it. Because there's a power differential there, isn't it? Yeah, there's a power differential there. Look at it as a political situation where the experimenter has control over when that rat is going to eat, how it's going to eat, what it's going to eat, when it's going to get fed, and all of the other things. And through the manipulation of those things, manipulates the rat's behavior, but ultimately creates its personality. And then I go back and say, let us see then in your own community, who controls your water? Who controls your food? Who controls your jobs? Who controls your symbols, your status symbols? Who controls the pay? And you will recognize then that through this control and through the power over vital things like food and water and shelter and jobs, we are created as a people. Through the vital ability of this white man as the experimenter to reinforce the kind of behavior he wants to reinforce and to punish the kind of behavior he wants to punish, he creates black people and African people the world over. And it's not black people in America, it's black people in the Caribbean, it's black people in South America, it's black people in Africa and Asia and wherever you find them. When he says, I'm not going to give you this loan this time. Or, starve your people, but you got to pay Chase Manhattan Bank. Oh, you mean your people are going to rise up in rebellion? Well, we'll send you aid in the form of police weapons so you can shoot them down in the street as they riot about the price of rice, because you got to pay us. And therefore, you become a bill collector for the system itself. And therefore, the monies that you can use to build schools and other things for your children now must be used to feed the fat cat. And therefore, the children are made ignorant, and the children are made without education, and the economy lags, and a whole social political system is created that ultimately works itself into the very personality of the people in that system. And those people, to a good degree, then, are created. It is only then when we begin to look at these situations from that point of view that these sort of bland lessons you see here have real meaning for us as people. And so what we're saying here then, ultimately, when we look at the so-called social learning theory, we're saying then that it is the nature of the social relationships between men, between people, that to a good degree helps to determine the characteristics of us as persons and as groups and as people as a whole. That is why we must be concerned about the nature of the social relationships we have with other people. Now then, this is the preface to the induction of self-hatred. And we're going to continue it as a shortly, and I'm going to end shortly, but I just want us to understand what we're dealing here. It's not enough to say that the whites induce self-hatred into us. I want us to see how this is achieved through the power and the ability of the white man to manipulate reinforcements. The ability of the white man, an ability that we, to a good degree, has let him have unchallenged, to manipulate reinforcement that is going to make our self-hatred possible. Because we just don't hate ourselves by accident. That hatred is deliberately induced because it serves a political, social, economic purpose. But that self-hatred cannot come about merely in terms of what white folks say about us, the white attitudes toward us. It must be related to power. It must be backed up by the ability to punish and the ability to reward. And therefore, what is said, when it is combined with power, then becomes the vehicle through which self-hatred is induced. I'm going to, in the following lectures then, look at the various means by which self-hatred is deliberately induced in, like if we're going to talk, I'll list some of them right quickly to indicate where we're going. And we'll talk a bit about the first one here. The association of innate, personal, group characteristics with negative assignations. We're going to talk about if that's not enough, that is, if creating self-hatred through just making a person's innate characteristics negative, or be perceived as negative, then one creates the characteristics. In other words, you create the characteristics that you hate. And this often happens, of course, in parental relationships and other relationships, where, in a sense, you make the person into something. You make them a thief, and then you hate them for being a thief. You see? And to a good extent, what has happened to the African personality is he's created, a character is created so that that character can be hated, so that that character can be used as a justification for exploitation and misuse and abuse. And we want to look then at that method and that technique. And this is quite a complicated one. Followed up by by the fact that you can induce self-hatred through what we call making positive, desirable characteristics unattainable, therefore creating an inferiority complex, self-negation, through social comparison, and so forth, white, and make it only attainable by whites. Then you induce self-hatred by those people who cannot make themselves white. And so often then one of the ways of creating self-hatred in an individual is putting those things that will get him out of that self-hatred out of his reach. And we will see that that is one of the methods. To create a reverse mentality and behavior, and to create desires by punishing the right orientation and by rewarding the wrong orientation. In other words, we're going to talk about how the black personality is reversed and turned backwards, so that the individual will almost by habit produce backward behavior. We're going to talk about this producing of backwardness, which produces frequent failures or success by accident, which produces a feeling of cursedness. We're going to also then talk about the individuation of the method of creating self-hatred. That is, reducing the individual's concept of himself as an individual. Also, the creation of maladjustment through a number of techniques. In our next section, then, we're going to look at the first segment here, the association of innate ethnic personal characteristics with negative assignations. You will see in the Bible itself that Adam, in this mythological account, is given control over creation by being given the power to name and classify all that is on the earth. In a sense, when God tells Adam that it is his prerogative to name and classify, he symbolically now is giving him control over the earth. The ability to name and define is a very powerful ability. And one of the major powers that the European has that we have got to take back is the European power of definition, of naming and determining what is real and what is unreal. One of the constants that I talk about, that is, I often try to get across the idea that despite how much things appear to change, they remain the same. And that we as people must not be deceived by superficial change. That often superficial change is deliberately created as a way of maintaining fundamental sameness. You must look at the real power relationship between Europeans and Africans. That is the key. And you must question whether that power relationship has changed at all over the past 400 or 500 years. You just cannot look at the idea that you're now in slavery and say that means we have advanced in some sort of way. Or that now we have certain job opportunities open to us, educational opportunities open to us, that now we can eat at the same counter with white folk and all of this kind of stuff as indicative of basic fundamental change. As a matter of fact, to a good extent, these changes have been diversions to keep us from seeing that the very fundamental relationship between blacks and whites has not changed at all. I've often said that you may marvel about how now you can get a degree in computer technology and how this was not available to your forefathers. But remember that your forefathers as slaves also had skills. They just did not chop cotton and work in the households. They were skilled craftsmen as slaves. And in fact, at the end of slavery, there were more black craftsmen and skilled craftsmen in some areas than there were whites. But what was the fundamental relationship? The fundamental relationship was that these skilled slaves worked for the benefit and power of their masters. And that fundamental relationship has not changed one whit today, ladies and gentlemen. You do computer engineering, but you're going to do it for IBM, and you're going to do it for GE, and you're going to do it for some white man ultimately. It's the same game, ladies and gentlemen. You may hang out in the same office. You may even marry them. You may even sleep with them. You may eat with them. But the fundamental power relationship is what? Still the same. Still the same. It hasn't changed. And the thing you have to look at then are not those superficial changes, but the fundamental relationship. And there are several of them that you will see have existed for the past 300, 400, 500 years, and that are still pretty much where they are today. And that even integration, and even assimilation, and even eating at the same lunch counter, and even the electing of black men to office and black women to office, even the electing of one to the presidency of the United States is going to serve the same function, to maintain the ultimate power of the white man over the black man. And therefore you cannot be deceived by those things. And this comes out of this ability of this white man to name and create definition. One of the books I would recommend for the reading list is the book White Over Black by Winthrop Jordan, a very copiously detailed book, and one I think you should certainly read. And I'll be indicating some others, of course. And this one I'm sure is still around. I don't know whether this one is available in the general market. Yes, and we have some of them here. The Negro's Image in the South by Claude H. Nolan, L-O-L-E-N, The Anatomy of White Supremacy. And of course, the one that I intended to quote from extensively tonight, Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Masks, which I highly recommend that you read. And of course, while you're reading these now, read some others because they can be a bit depressing, but you want to look at them very closely. So, read Diop's African Contributions to Civilization, Pre-Colonial Africa, some Introduction to African Civilizations by Jackson, and some of the others are sort of, weighted out a little bit.
Okay, we're back, everybody. All right, now, that was heavyweight number 1, Dr. Amos Wilson. I'm going to go into Dr. Joy Gurey's book again, and this time we're dealing with knowledge of ourselves. She states right here on page 181, right at the bottom where it says knowledge of ourselves. So who and what are we? If we are to believe what the dominant society would seemingly like us to believe, the lies they promulgate, we are stupid, criminal, unmotivated, lazy, underachieving, immoral, and undisciplined, in a word, inferior, history reveals a very different story. African Americans are strong people, seemingly infinitely resilient people. We have a long history of enduring and preserving through the severest of trials. Our ancestors endured slavery and preserved through Jim Crow. Evidence of these qualities can be seen today through our struggle for civil rights and our continuing pursuit of level playing field. We are an industrious people. We have built communities under seemingly impossible circumstances. During the Great Depression, when the entire country was under enormous duress, we managed to care for one another with fewer resources than even the poorest of whites. Families gathered together, usually in churches, to help sustain large numbers of blacks and see them through those extremely tough times. We are a creative people. Through slave times and oppressive decades that followed, we established distinctive culture relate with new language, names, customs, and behaviors. We have invented our own game, food, music, art, and fashions. Many of us have managed to carve out a prosperous existence for what at times amounted to society's scraps. We are just and forgiving people. Think about it. Despite the relentless oppression under which blacks have lived since slavery, there have been no large-scale organized retaliatory terrorism fueled by hatred and a need for revenge. We have demonstrated time and again that while we can courageously fight for justice, we are not crippled with hatred and rage, proving ourselves to be among the most magnanimous of people. We are the spiritual, loving, and hopeful people. It is amazing to me that after all the work done to dominate, diminish, and destroy us, after centuries of the most vile and horrific abuses meant to break our spirit and will, that we still have faith in God. It is a tribute to our fundamental decency that we still have in love for humanity. It is a testament to our fortitude that we still can hope and dream. These are some of the components of our true nature. We as a people seem to have forgotten that this is who and what we are. We seem to have forgotten our own nobility. We have forgotten our own greatness. Perhaps many of us have never known. This is not surprising given to the time, money, and energy spent over centuries to convince us to accept the degraded status imposed upon us. Whatever the case, it is vital that we collectively regain this knowledge so we can take our rightful place in the world community. It is critical that we come to understand ourselves and have the understanding permeate us to our very core. For such a deep understanding will make healing from our wounds that much more complete. Okay. Dr. Joy DeGour, in her book, Be the Healing, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And before we get down into any more of the broadcast, I'm going to take another little quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, so y'all hold on a minute. We'll be back.
If it is against the law for the bank to loan out depositors' money to you, how could the bank give you a loan? And if that's the case, how are they able to keep their doors open? And in some cities, they have the biggest buildings in town. What happens to the person who deposits money in the bank? What do they receive outside of nickels and dimes in the form of what's called interest? How can you get paid? Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form, and I'll rush you my free report. Let's get down to the bottom of this situation. Let me show you how what's going on in how to deal with it. Okay, TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace, y'all. When it comes to relationships between debtors and creditors, what's the difference? Have you ever seen a debtor try to function in the private? Let me tell you, it's a sight to see. It's like the man who found out I hadn't eaten any meat in 8 months. He rushed up to me and told me he found out I hadn't eaten any meat in 8 months and that I better eat something quick before it's too late. Get out of the public and into the private. Get my free report by filling out the Contact Us form at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. When you fill out that Contact Us form, I'll rush you my free report straight to your email box. And that way you'll be able to contact me, and we can work on getting you out of the public and into the private. Okay? TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace.
cry, the less you pee. Those are the words of the noted psychologist and expert in trauma, Mercedes Mann, my grandmother. That was my first lesson in black folk mental health. In layman's terms, stop all that damn crying. In more clinical terms, it's a passed-down coping mechanism used to teach the internalization of trauma to maintain survival. It's giving very much, this is what I learned, so this is what I'm going to teach you. I am a black therapist with a black therapist, and I find human behavior fascinating. I've been in the field for 16 years, and I have a private practice where I work with majority black women. In my observation, black people are dope. Despite stolen lands and stolen bodies and stolen culture, despite laws and psychology and science skewed and used with white supremacy in order to justify the inhumane treatment, black people have mastered survival. Surviving and living and loving and worshiping and being so damn beautiful. But I wonder, how? What protective factors are at play? So I have a theory. Ride out with me on this one. Trauma responses. In order to maintain survival, black people have integrated trauma responses into the culture. So much so that we hand it down from generation to generation under the guise of values and traditions. Let's get into it. Let's talk science. Trauma responses are a physiological reaction in response to a perceived harmful event, a threat, or a threat to survival. A necessary system, it was wired into the human nervous system in order to keep us safe. So if there was a bear in the wild, this system would kick in to maintain survival. While it's necessary, it was never intended to be a long-term solution. The body is not meant to stay in that state of arousal. It's supposed to be short-term. Keep that in mind. All right, boom, let's talk American history. During the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans built the foundation of this country on the raping, pillaging, enslaving, dehumanizing of Africans. They used mental, physical, and spiritual warfare in order to integrate white supremacy into the violence. They skewed psychology, religion, and science, all to justify this treatment. For example, drapetomania, which is when enslaved Africans would attempt to run away, was once a mental health diagnosis. So, with all that said, traumatizing black bodies is as American as the strange fruit in apple pie. When a community is traumatized over and over, it causes a collective trauma experience. So when we put the science and the history together, white supremacy is the bear. White supremacy is the bear. But let's take it a step further. When I started, I said, the more you cry, the less you pee as a clinical intervention. Due to the black trauma experience my grandmother had learned and subsequently was teaching, the internalization of emotions is a safety concern. To externalize emotions does not maintain survival. Now, I didn't know when she was telling me this, if this was about the fact that I used the bathroom so much or the fact that I was so emotional. Either way, it was a deliberate attempt to stop the mind-body connection. Survival mode. Black people live our entire lives in survival mode. I'm going to let that sink in. Black people, there is trauma in your traditions. Now, what does this look like? It looks like everyday lessons we learn, some verbal and nonverbal, that are given to us with the intent of maintaining survival. So, for example, respectability politics, trauma response. When we grow up, we learn we have to work 10 times harder than everybody else. Make sure you get to work on time. You know them white folks watching you. Don't get in here and embarrass me in front of these white people. Whatever you do, please don't give them a reason to call the police. The rigorous internal and external self-awareness rooted in anti-blackness is traumatizing to the system. It is exhausting. Maintain survival mode. Code switching, trauma response. Yo, so the way I talk to the people I know and other black people, like, yes, girl, you better do it and do it well. It's substantially different than the way I talk in the workplace. Good morning, Megan. How you doing? You're awesome. Code switching is a means of survival. It literally means getting and keeping the job. And code switching is not just a change in language, it's a change in tone, intonation, volume, pitch, and the way I carry myself. It is exhausting. Maintain survival mode. The strong black woman trope, trauma response. So I was in session with a beautiful black human, and they said to me, well, I hold the weight, but I hold it well. And I said to them, well, what would happen if you didn't hold the weight? She was talking about stress. What would happen if you put it down? And we both looked out the window together because black women rarely learn ourselves outside of stress, outside of trauma. It's as if every lesson that we get is supposed to teach us to be strong. The more you cry, the less you pee. Stop all that crying. Be strong. Your job is supposed to be stressful. Makes you strong. People are supposed to have access to your body. Makes you strong. Love is supposed to hurt. Makes you strong. You're supposed to strap the world on your back. Makes you strong. I've had black women come into my office and spout off trauma like grocery lists, always maintaining composure, never leaving survival mode. My name is Jalan Agnew, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. When I go to various trainings and workshops, this is how I introduce myself. It might sound normal. However, I am having a trauma response. It's a mix of respectability politics, code switching, and the strong black woman trope. I, through the lessons that I've learned that I have to show myself in a different way. Because I have distant memories of daily microaggressions. And, oh my God, are you the new staff? What do you work in the kitchen? And being overlooked for a position. And, oh my God, Dylan, I thought you were the other African-American woman. I'm so sorry. And crying and being called aggressive. Giving validation to my grandmother's wise words. And like I said earlier, trauma responses are not intended to be long-term. When you are in a constant state of survival, your body cannot regenerate and rest, leaving more room for illness, mental, physical, and spiritual illness. Black people, there is trauma in your traditions and illness in your trauma. Now, when I started this, I said I believe that healing black people is what I'm on earth for. And I think it's time for a mindset shift from surviving to thriving. Because we are in survival mode so much that rest makes us uncomfortable. So I suggest resting by any means necessary, realizing that internal peace is a revolutionary act, valuing health over hustle, and making sure that we're doing all these things to keep ourselves alive, because I can go on and on about the trauma responses. Hustle, trauma response. Colorism, trauma response. Putting cancer-causing chemicals in our hair that causes cancer, trauma response. Our addiction to unhealthy foods, trauma response. Our aversion to traditional and indigenous religious beliefs, trauma response. So I'm going to add something to what my grandmother said. The more you cry, the more at health you will be.
Okay, we're back. Now, let's go over here, and keep in mind, we're going to be converting this over to YouTube. We're going to throw it on up there. And so y'all will get a chance, if you're working on your job or whatever, you don't have a chance to listen to it live right now. We'll be converting on over there so you get a chance to look at it. Now, let's take a look at another conversation. Y'all hold on from another heavyweight. Hold on a minute.
Cognitive dissonance is what occurs when a person is holding on to contradictory ideas simultaneously. Ideas like, we really honor and uphold notions of freedom and democracy.
It's true, you know.
And at the same time that this is being espoused, committing literal genocide against Native people in America and enslaving generations of people of African descent. That would be an example of a conflict that is going on that has to be reconciled internally. As we look at institutions, as we look at how people move through the world in America. In other words, how do you espouse these ideas of freedom and at the same time you are demonstratively doing something opposite of that? And in fact, committing acts that are no less than barbaric as it relates to oppressing people. So, you know, this is the dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance is when you have been conditioned to think, feel, and behave in a certain way. You've been socialized.
I've got the busiest job in the whole world, American housewife.
He gets teeth much whiter, you can see.
Special. For whitening clothes, Blue Cheer is different. So clean, so white.
And all of a sudden, everything you've been taught, everything you believe, has suddenly come face to face with a truth that contradicts it. And this truth is so overwhelmingly powerful that it's hard for you to ignore it. But in confronting this truth, it upsets the internal belief system upon which your life has functioned. It's when you've been raised in a certain religion or a certain political ideology, and someone brings you a morsel of truth that shocks the hell out of your internal intellectual belief system, and the truth they gave you was so powerful that it disrupted and uprooted almost everything you believe. Your ego in your mind automatically begins to try to find a way to shoot down the truth that you just heard. But because your spirit is telling you that this was the truth, your ego and mind is not doing a good enough job to shoot down that new information that is making it hard for you to remain a consistent adherent to that which you were previously told to believe.
So then, what does one do to calm the mind of the people whose ancestors perpetrated these atrocities? So you have to somehow normalize the behavior. In other words, make somehow the idea of American chattel slavery for 339 years somehow seem, you know, an okay thing to do. Because imagine 339 years of being told, oh, no, this is okay. The problem is them. The problem is we were benefiting them, or we were helping them, or whatever rationalization they receive. So when they get this information now, the jolt is, well, no, that can't be true.
They do not want to accept the reality that processing that information would bring about. And so white folks suffer, and Dr. Jeffries is the first one I heard use the term like 30, 40 years ago, that white folks suffer from cognitive dissonance, that white folks have an inability to process information that shows black folks in a positive light, you know, because to process that information in that manner would then show them in the negative light that they have lived out over the centuries in their relationship to us.
Then we have to take a look at what effect then does that have on those who have oppressed. Because again, they have had to live with generations of denial and acceptance of that dissonance. And the way that they've dealt with that is to not just deny it, but hide it. To hide any truth associated with what would cause the conflict. For you to see the barbarism, for you to see the levels and the involvement of people in lynchings and the behavior of large groups of people, generations of people around mutilating and hanging and beating people. So what you have to do to, one, hide it, or two, justify it, produces this kind of callousness that you see, this open defiance in the face of a preponderance of evidence. A preponderance of evidence that says, here it is before us.
White supremacy, when you talk about racism, same thing. White folk haven't been socialized that Africans are inferior all their life as part of their internal intellectual belief system. All of a sudden they come face to face with a black man or woman who's more intelligent than any white person they know or have ever met or have ever read about. Wow. For the first time, I've learned that black people are not inferior, but I've been taught they were. And coming from a culture of white racism and supremacy, I have to rally my psychological resources to come up with an excuse or justification for just how this black person was able to be this intelligent. And to give you an example of how the ego and the mind will combat the cognitive dissonance, for example, it will rationalize the intelligence of the black man. It's when the white person tell themselves, there's always exceptions to every rule. Yes, he was smart. Yes, he was very intelligent. But that's only because there's exceptions to every rule. Most black folk are not that smart. Most black folk are not that intelligent. You're not likely to come across a lot of them. And so it becomes more easy to tolerate when you come up with a justification, when you come up with a rationale for why you're experiencing information or circumstances that are in direct contradiction to what you've been taught to believe.
So their perspective is, well, you must be not telling the truth because we're benevolent, we're good, we're kind, which was what had to be fed for generations in order for people to somehow normalize, well, again, what results in being pretty much barbaric and horrific behavior.
In the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites. It's the subject that's talked about all the time. And as far as accepting them socially, if that's what you mean, I could never do that.
In recent times, we're seeing all of the videotape footage of police use of deadly force. The police use of deadly force is not new, but there's a preponderance of evidence that is showing it now, which is producing what? Dissonance. That says, well, this can't be true, even in the face of it. Even watching it, they go, this simply can't be true, because you are now looking at least 300 years of denial that anything wrong has happened, that these people of African descent got anything other than what they deserved. And so now in the face of the entire globe looking at this and saying, no, this is not okay. And really it's sparking, I would venture to say, some incredible anxiety. And not only anxiety, but a large degree, a large dose of paranoia. For example, in Portland, Oregon, in 2014, right in front of an immigrant refugee organization in Portland, Oregon, there's a group of white people standing with a banner which says diversity equals white genocide. This is 2014. So I think that those, in terms of epigenetics, we're looking at people who are absolutely losing it. The fear, because again, they're not looking at the behavior that has been exhibited towards people of color as being anything other than what, of course, people of color deserve. But now they're beginning to see that not only is that not true, but you're not going to be able to continue to do this without the entire world looking on and holding you accountable for that.
Okay, we're back, y'all. Now, let's go back one more time. Let's cross-reference this thing and look at the current condition from somebody else from the outside looking in at what is it that caused this situation. Okay, we're going one more time.
This is the case with the West. They developed disproportionately in the area of brutality. They place a great deal of importance and value in violence as a kind of virtue. They think that they can claim the moral high ground basically by throwing someone off of a cliff. So this is just a characteristic that they have. They're violent. And this, again, in my opinion, most likely originates in their rather squalid, harsh conditions. Their so-called civilization emerged from harsh conditions. I mean, Europe is cold. The climate is harsh. There's scarce natural resources. Historically, only about a quarter of the terrain in Europe was arable land. So these are people who were struggling to survive. They had to battle for resources. You know, the modern stereotype of Westerners as being soft and pampered and prosperous and so on. This is truly a modern concept because that has not at all been their history. Material resources became intensely important to them. And whatever means expedited the acquisition of resources, by definition, that was good and admirable. And as I've talked about, the Europeans did not have in their various pagan belief systems any guidance that could enable them to cope with the relative deprivation of their societies. We know that they prioritized the successful acquisition of material resources. And this is the highest good for them. So it doesn't matter for them, it doesn't matter to them that this acquisition is achieved by means of savage oppression, if it's achieved by deceit or treachery or theft. If violence or cunning can succeed, then success is all that matters. If violence and cunning succeed, then it also necessarily means in their minds that peacefulness and honesty are impractical virtues. And an impractical virtue is the same thing as a vice in their mind. In other words, if it prevents you from acquiring resources, then it is categorically inferior and wrong. And that will apply to any real civilized values, whether it's peacefulness or honesty or wisdom or restraint or sacrifice or compassion or honor or what have you. None of these virtues deserve respect in their eyes if they hinder you from conquest and pillage. This attitude would be further cemented by the fact that their approach enables you to conquer and pillage genuinely superior cultures and civilizations who adhere to those so-called impractical virtues. If you were truly better than us, in other words, we wouldn't have your stuff. We wouldn't be able to take all your things. We wouldn't be able to take you over. If your civilization was actually superior, then we wouldn't be able to conquer you. That's the thinking. That's the thinking and that's the message. Their message is, your civilization is undeveloped because we were able to conquer you. And because we were able to conquer you, we are superior. But don't worry, we're here to civilize you now. They have an actual disdain for any values, for any morals, for any principles that impede in any way material acquisition. You can translate material acquisition to, in modern parlance, to productivity. So anything that impedes so-called productivity is belittled or outright despised. Even if that is conscience, even if it's upholding trust, even if it's health, even if it's parenthood for that matter. They have to make you think that any other system of prioritization is archaic and obsolete and backwards, that it's incompatible with so-called modernity. And modernity, when they say it, just means sociopathic materialism, which treats moral values and principles as decorative extras that should never interfere with so-called productivity. Their whole so-called civilization developed and has been driven by an obsession with material deprivation, which evolved into a sanctification of anyone who successfully acquired abundant material goods and resources, whoever has amassed wealth. Those people are considered to be the most admired, the most respected, the most important, the most authoritative, the most honorable, the wisest people in society. And thus the whole system of society that they designed is designed to serve those people and to idolize them and glorify them and pay homage to them. From the time of the European warlords to the time of the European feudal lords to now and the lords of business and capital. That's why, for instance, their proof that an economy is healthy and successful is that the economy has produced X number of billionaires. Wealth is the basis of authority. That's how these people think. They want to ensure that everyone thinks that moral values and principles are negotiable and that ultimately they're disposable, because the only thing that ultimately matters is material success at any cost. It's a marauder mentality. If we abandon all of the traits and the characteristics of our civilization that make it superior, then we will become actually inferior, because we will have joined a game in which they already excel, the game of violence and ruthless materialism. It's like if an athlete of one sport agrees to compete with an athlete of another sport in that other athlete's sport. It's like if a golfer or a chess champion agrees to compete in a boxing match with a boxer. It's a rigged competition simply due to the incompatibility of the skill sets. And that's the case of the Muslims and people in the Global South generally, who have more mature, more evolved cultures and civilizations, if they agree to play the barbarian game of the West. This is a case of you accepting that the emperor's clothes are actually the most stylish and most luxurious clothes that you can wear. And so you agree to strip away everything that actually makes you elegant and dignified and protected from the elements, and you want to look like the emperor. And at the end of that game, it won't be that the emperor has no clothes. It will be that the emperor has your clothes, even if they don't fit him. And you'll be left there standing naked, like a fool. At which point, the emperor will tell you that you're a naked heathen, and he'll teach you how to dress. That's the game that they want us to play.
All right, there you have it. Okay, so now you know, one more time I had to put this in there, so we won't lose track of the cause, the rudimental cause of the land and the people that's occupying the land and what's going on with them. Okay, let's deal with the sisters now. Y'all hold on, sisters.
As I said, this book demonstrates that we are not as different as we like to think that we are. So what I'm going to go over real brief right now is what the attributes are of the good black woman. Since she's not on television, we may not recognize her. Okay. Now, the good black woman has 7 attributes, and then I'm going to explain to you how to utilize those in your day-to-day life. The good black woman has self-discipline, courteousness, cheerfulness, self-respect, intelligence, cleanliness, and love. Now, we've heard that terminology. You know, it's like one of those where they tell you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. What do that mean? You know, how can I make that functional in my day-to-day life to benefit me as a practice? It sounds like all theory. Where's the practice? What do I do? The good black woman has self-discipline. That's self-control. Let me make that real for you, sisters. We can start with our mouth. The good black woman can control her mouth. She don't have to say everything that comes up. It's okay if he get the last word sometime. You know, she don't cuss in public. And she works on not cussing in private. She don't tear a man down with her mouth because they can't out-argue her. Can't nobody out-argue her. I have charged that we nag our men too much. We keep our men's head tied up so much with our petty grievances about our personal relationship that he don't have time to think and plan for our future. Because he got to deal with what's going to happen with us every day. You know, it's real odd. When the black man come home, he almost has to do a wind test or stick his toe in the door. He don't know what's waiting. He don't know who in there today. He knows it's a possibility that there's some kind of new monster that he didn't even know about yesterday. So, you know, we need to not make it like that. We need to not be so vicious with our mouth. You know, men are not petty like that. They're not going to out-argue us. And it has been proven that verbal abuse is just as harmful as physical abuse. So let's not use our mouth to do that to him. The good black woman is courteous. She says, thank you, baby. I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate every effort you make. Try harder. I'm going to work with you. Thank you. I know you did your best. Now that's a whole new language. But just to say that during the course of the day, every day, with the man that you're trying to be with or want to be with, will make our life easier. We can't get it if we don't give it. We keep wanting them to give us and do something for us that we refuse to do and give to them. It don't work like that. The good black woman has self-respect. She don't have to go out naked just to get the attention of a man. I have sisters all over the country, and they come up to me after the lectures, and they'll be talking to me, and they'll say, well, you know, all he think about is sex. All he think about is my body. I say, why don't you show him something else? And then here's the really good one. They'll come up and they'll have on a weave. They have on false eyelashes, another whole face, false fingernails, and all of that. And then they'll say, but I'm looking for a real man. It's real deep.
woman can pull a dress down without thinking that it devalues her. She doesn't have to use her body because she has so many other good attributes about herself to get the attention of a man. We can take the sisters in a position to take all of the charge and sexual energy out of the black community by just dressing differently. We have the power and control over that. That don't stop you from being beautiful. You know, that don't stop you from getting a man. And it certainly puts things on the right perspective so some other judgments can be made other than physical. It don't take no knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to have a sexual reaction. That's the most base. We spend less time doing that than anything else we do. So, you know, that doesn't always have to be the forefront issue. We know we are capable of that. The good black woman has intelligence, meaning that she knows how to behave properly in the streets. She's not in the wrong place. Some of our women don't know what else to do other than go to the bar. They need some activities. Some of our women thinking that staying home on the weekend is some kind of sin. Some of our women think that if they don't have a new outfit to wear every day, that they're going to self-destruct. You know, we have a lot of that kind of nonsense going. Every time we buy new outfits and clothes or whatever, all we're doing is sending money out of our community. We don't own no clothing store. If the white man closed the shoe factory, we'd all be here barefooted tonight. We don't own no shoe factory. You know, very base things that we don't own, that we put our money into and demand we have to have them. A lot of times our men look at us and know that he ain't never going to be able to make enough money to give us all of the things we say we want. And don't no man want to be with no woman who he constantly got to deny her the things that she says she wants. And that represents failure to him, to have to always, you know, not be able to provide us with what we ask for. One of the ways we can do that is to start being satisfied with less. You know, the good black woman is clean. Now that's a hard one. The good black woman try to keep the house clean. Good black woman is clean by her own body. You know, a lot of those things we kind of take for granted, but all of our people don't know about that. There are people who are angry with me because I even describe the fact that some of us as sisters don't have the proper personal hygiene as if that don't exist. We have too much falsehood and pretense going about our condition. Everybody that's dressed up ain't clean. You know, that's just the truth. We have to look at our condition in the light of truth. Stop reacting emotionally and pretending that just because we don't want to deal. One of the most difficult things that I deal with out here is trying to teach our people the difference between an actual fact and an opinion. Our people think that they can accept or reject truth based on how they feel about it. Your feelings don't change the truth. The truth is just going to be there. You can feel any kind of way you want to feel about it. Those kind of emotions have kept us from growing. Because anything we don't like, we just reject that and say, well, I don't believe that. That don't mean that it's not the truth. It just makes you a disbeliever. The good black woman practices non-possessive loving. Now, y'all know that's a hard one. Now, envy is wanting what someone else has. And jealousy, of course, is just selfishness. Non-possessive loving is not an easy one for us to practice. And, of course, I have a lot of sisters and some brothers who are in disagreement with me saying that. But the actual fact is that our men are outnumbered about 5 to 1. And nature is going to require that the men take responsibility for more than one woman and her children. Most of our men have children by more than one woman anyway. So I don't know why that was such a surprise, allegedly, when I said that. The black man has not been waiting on me to tell him he could have more than one woman. You know, I'm in agreement with the rest of y'all. I don't think he should do that, but I feel like you did. There are some things perhaps about the nature of our man that we have been given some definitions about that are not true. There are some things he can do that we call him a dog. We do not have the same capabilities as a man. I am not talking about fornication and adultery. That's something else. I'm talking about actual responsibility of fatherhood and husbandhood of another family. That's quite different from fornication and adultery. We don't have the same capabilities of them. That's right. A man can have 2 homes, 2 sets of in-laws. He can eat dinner at 2 houses, 2 sets of children, 2 garages, 2 separate sets of friends attached to that woman. He can have all of that. We can't do that. We can't cook dinner at 2 houses. We can't sleep with one man 4 nights a week and another one 3. Ain't no man gonna agree with that. We can't have 1 set of children we leave in one place and go and stay in another place and take care of another set. It doesn't work for us. Now that does not mean that we can't have sex with more than 1 man. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just taking responsibility for your children. Now certainly every man can't take financial responsibility for all of his children. He can do something. But a man who is spending time with a child is going to do something for it. Because then they'll find out what we have since we've been taking care of them by ourselves. You don't like to always say, no, I can't do it. No, I ain't got it. So the children will make you get it up. You spend some time with it. You know, that's an important thing. The effectiveness of the principles that I just described, their usefulness has not diminished just because modern opinion has changed about them. There is not a black man in this room who does not still enjoy it if his woman bake him a cake. Well, our young daughters are being raised and taught that that's old style and that's out of fashion. We are not making those rules. Somebody else is, and they're imposing them on us and making us think that we have to qualify under them. I tell the brothers, just like I tell the sisters, if you have a woman that you've been working with for months or years, and you can't get that woman to get in agreement with your program, then get rid of her and get another one. And I tell the sisters the same thing. If you're with a man you can't agree with, don't make his life miserable. Get with a man you can agree with. But we spend too much time living in hell with each other. We spend too much time tearing each other down, trying to make the other person do different or function different. If you want somebody to change, first change yourself. We set the example. We are the teacher. We are the mother. We set the example.
Okay. Heavyweight number 2, Sister Scheherazade Ali, 7 attributes of the good black woman. She just laid it out for you. And we're coming down to the close of the broadcast, and I'm hoping that you all got something out of this. Now, there is no doubt in my mind, I'm going to have to come back with part 2 of this. And because I didn't cover all the ground here this evening, but I will be coming back with part 2 to this broadcast, okay? But in the meantime, y'all look out for the video. I'm going to go ahead and convert this thing tonight and get it converted over to YouTube video, throw it up on YouTube, and I'll be posting it into your social sites and all of that stuff. You'll be able to get a hold to it. And for those of you who want to listen to it again, or for those of you who are working tonight and you didn't get a chance to listen to it, you'll be able to go and look at the edited version right there on YouTube, because they're going to take out a few little pieces, little nitbits and things. And I hope you don't mess with the meat and potatoes of the situation. Okay. But nevertheless, I want to make the announcement that on October the 26th, right down here in Jacksonville, Florida, we will be having the Black Vegan Fest. We'll have live bands. We'll have live professional chefs on hand. They will be showing you, teaching you how to do these vegan meals and stuff so you can contribute to your health. The children will be able to participate in growing food and planting food, and you'll see the actual foods and stuff out there. If you care to come down and do a little fishing. And this is for people all over the United States. You're welcome to come on down. It's a free event. If you want to be a vendor, you're going to have to just type in the blackveganfest.com and deal with Brother Diallo School, or go over there to Urban Geoponics, and you'll be able to see the site and see where we're going to be down here. And but nevertheless, that's what we're going to be doing on October the 26th, right down here in Jacksonville, Florida. Okay? All right, come to the close. I've been your host, Tarhaka Amana El Ben. Until next time.
Florida pedestrians, be aware. Watch out for traffic. Always walk on the sidewalk if there is one. If no sidewalks are present, walk against the direction of traffic. Cross the roadway where pedestrians are expected. Wear bright colors, carry a flashlight, and follow pedestrian signs and signals. And remember, look out before you step out. Learn more at flhsmv.gov/child safety. A message from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles.
There's no way to prepare for the impact an accident makes on your life. That's why we've spent 40 years getting ready for that moment when you need compassion and immediate action. The right doctors, investigators, our team of experienced attorneys, and your free consultation is already in place. So if you've been hurt, remember, the FARA safety net is right here to catch you. All you have to do is call FARA and FARA. It's what we built. Jacksonville.